Tonight, we continue our look at possible presidential contenders. Jim Webb has been a Marine Corps officer, Secretary of the Navy, and U.S. Senator from Virginia. The question is, can he mount a challenge to what will likely be a massive Hillary Clinton machine?
I will think my way through issues and take a stand based on what I truly believe is good for the country.
Former Virginia Senator Jim Webb has been busy selling himself as a potential presidential candidate.
I have decided to launch an exploratory committee to examine whether I should run for president in 2016.
So far, he hasn't generated a ton of attention. But the email scandal plaguing presumed Democratic frontrunner Hillary Clinton may push some Democrats to consider other options. Just hours before the press conference where Clinton tried to explain away the problem, Webb was asked if her email debacle gave him an opening.
I think that the best thing is to listen to her views, and people will make conclusions that, in a better way than I can.
Not exactly a blistering attack. So far, at least, Webb hasn't wanted to talk about Hillary Clinton much at all. Isn't the mere fact that you are considering running a sense that you're not buying into this coronation thing and that the party you feel needs alternatives?
Well, I've always been independent, making up my own mind and doing my best to stick to what I believe in. And I will continue to do that. I don't think that should surprise anyone. The question is, are there enough people who will understand that this is a kind of a different approach to how we should pick our national leadership? You know, people are portraying it as David and Goliath here. I've never paid attention to that. Even when I ran for the Senate, we ran against someone who was a long-time incumbent, and what I wanted to do was put the issues that I cared about in front of people to talk about where the country needs to go, and then just see what happens. You said a few weeks ago, I'm quoting here, the Democratic Party has lost its way. What did you mean by that? The people who have no voice in the corridors of power could always count on the Democratic Party to be talking about those issues, economic fairness issues particularly. And it's kind of up for grabs these days. I think the Democratic Party needs to get back on that message. Webb says he's concerned that his party has steadily continued to lose more and more of the white working class vote. If we want to really move to what we can call post-racial America, we can't do that if we end up with two political parties, one of which is comprised essentially of people of color and a small group of people who are categorized as white, and then another party that is basically white. We need to do that with an inclusive mix based on other conditions. And then we can say we've moved beyond racial America. My wife is from Asia. When I look at my wife, I don't see a person of color. I see the woman that I love. Her country called, His other love, the military. As we walked in front of the Marine Corps Memorial showing 6 Americans hoisting a flag over Iwo Jima, Webb, a highly decorated Marine who served in Vietnam, told me he visits nearby Arlington National Cemetery once a week. You can go walk by there and look at the names, and, there are famous people and there are not so famous people, but every one of them has a story. After leaving the military, Webb worked on Capitol Hill for the House Armed Services Committee and then in the Defense Department under President Ronald Reagan before becoming Reagan's Secretary of the Navy. He's written 10 books, including Fields of Fire and Born Fighting, and screenplays, including Rules of Engagement, which became a popular movie starring Tommy Lee Jones and Samuel L. Jackson. Webb ran for Senate in 2006 with little funding and few staff members against a heavily favored incumbent, Republican Senator George Allen. He ended up winning by a narrow margin. Webb retired after serving just one term in the U.S. Senate. Many analysts say there would be significant challenges for a Webb presidential candidacy.
Jim Webb is a very unconventional candidate. It's often said that he marches to his own drummer, and that's absolutely true. His advantages, obviously, are his wide experience and his bipartisan experience. The downside of Jim Webb is obvious. It's difficult to see how Jim Webb, who is not exactly a rabble-rouser, would be able to energize the base to overcome the odds and beat Hillary Clinton for the nomination.
On the issues, When you heard President Obama say that the ISIS was the JV team, what was your reaction?
We have an obligation to evaluate any of these threats to the United States in terms of whether this involves international terrorism, in which case we have the right, and the President has the right to use force, or whether it is localized, in which case we need to have a discussion before we use force.
Is there an Obama doctrine, do you think?
The last really clear doctrine, in my view, was the Nixon doctrine that came out toward the end of the Vietnam War with Henry Kissinger and Nixon, working on a set of parameters that everyone understood in terms of how we would examine our foreign policy interests and how we would either use force or otherwise help our allies. And we haven't had one since the end of the Cold War. And this is how you end up with so many of these potential uses of force that don't seem to be connected by a strategy.
You voted for Obamacare. Would you be willing to make significant changes to Obamacare now, seeing how it's being implemented?
I was one of those who warned early in June of '09 in the White House that this was not being handled properly as a leadership issue. You had a situation where I think in order to avoid what they saw as the difficulties of Hillary click care, where they advanced a 1,000-page bill, they did not advance a bill. They allowed 5 different congressional committees to put forward bills, so we ended up with 7,000 pages of contradictory information. I voted with the Republicans 18 times during the votes on health care reform. And I certainly would agree that there are places that we could look at in order to make it a better law.
Anything specifically, like businesses choosing plans, or?
I think it's time to do a real shakedown on the bill and take suggestions from the Congress and from experts in the administration.
Webb continues to write, but also seems undeterred by the challenges of a potential presidential run.
I was born to lead. I was raised to lead, and at the same time I found enormous enjoyment out of writing and taking very complex issues and bringing them into a storyline so people can understand them emotionally and kind of fit into their understanding of larger things in their life.
You paint pictures with words. Can you imagine you sitting behind the Resolute desk?
I don't have a problem with that. My public service has been 4 different periods where I have been able to sit back, make decisions, listen to people. One of the beauties of stepping out and being a writer is that you have to get out in the world that politics create and see how people live. It makes it, I think, more understandable for me in terms of where I think the country needs to go.